am I atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where I just saw a very frightened-looking brace of ducks go past, which means the Haitians can't be far behind. You know, did you hear that in Haiti, the most popular Marx Brothers movie is Duck Soup? And the most popular Nintendo game is Duck Hunt? And the most popular NHL team is the Anaheim Ducks? And the most popular cartoon character is a tie between Daffy Duck and Donald Duck, but I guess they're all just as tasty, right? Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the special number 2 presidential debate edition of the Blast Radius. I am your humble host who is flying solo tonight. I have no co-host, but we won't worry about that now. I hopefully will have enough room to do a couple minutes of talking in before this thing goes live in about 12 minutes or so. But first I have a special treat for you. A Hitler downfall parody video. I didn't know people were still doing these, to be honest with you, but apparently there's a very popular YouTube channel that I was doing these videos back when I was still on Facebook, like 12 years ago, and amazingly, they can still be funny. Here is your very own Kamala Harris Hitler downfall video. Do enjoy.
Was ist los? Woher kommt die Schießerei?
Mein Führer, darf ich Ihnen zum Geburtstag gratulieren? Mein Führer, wir haben noch keine Meldung. Ich spreche gerade mit Koller.
Koller, geben Sie mir Koller. Koller.
What do you want to know?
Sie wissen, dass Berlin unter Artilleriefeuer liegt.
Well, let's start with this.
Hören Sie den Beschuss nicht?
Prices have gone up. And families and individuals are dealing with the realities that bread costs more, that gas costs more. And we have to understand what that means. That's about the cost of living going up. That's about having to stress and stretch limited resources. That's about a source of stress for families that is not only economic, but is on a daily level, something that is a heavy weight to carry. So it is something that we take very seriously. Very seriously.
Die Russen sollen eine Eisenbahnbrücke über die Oder haben.
We must together work together to see where we are headed, where we are going, and our vision for where we should be, but also see it as a moment, yes, to together address the challenges.
Kommende Generation dankbar sein. Ich übernehme für alles die volle Verantwortung.
We have the ability to see what can be, unburdened by what has been, and then to make the possible actually happen.
Das sind ja nur 12 Kilometer bis zum Stadtkern. Ist der Russe schon so nah?
Well, I think culture is a reflection of our moment and our time. Right. And present culture is the way we express how we're feeling about the moment. And we should always find times to express how we feel about the moment that is a reflection of joy, because it comes in the morning.
What does that mean?
We have to find ways to also express the way we feel about the moment in terms of just having language and a connection to how people are experiencing life. And I think about it in that way too.
Haben Sie noch Zweifel an Ihrem Befehl? Ich glaube!
We all watched the television coverage of just yesterday. That's on top of everything else that we know and don't know yet, based on what we've just been able to see. And because we've seen it or not doesn't mean it hasn't happened.
Ich habe mich klar genug ausgedrückt! Ich bin das letzte Bollwerk gegen diese Gefahr.
So you're now no longer are you necessarily keeping those private files in some file cabinet that's locked in the basement of the house.
It's on your laptop, and it's then therefore
up here in this cloud that exists above us, right?
Von allem Anfang an bin ich so verraten und betrogen worden. Es wurde ein ungeheurer Verrat geübt am deutschen Volke.
The United States has to be consistent. There were times when we were more engaged and we saw good results. Less engaged, and we can see where the work and the partnerships then deteriorate. So I am committed to ensuring that we engage in an active way on the root causes, on addressing the cause and effect, and also being partners in the Western Hemisphere, understanding that we have a responsibility, and if we ignore that responsibility, it will visit itself upon us in a very domestic way.
Nur um zu lernen, wie man Messer Gabel hält. Aber alle diese Verräter werden bezahlen.
A movement that has always been about the ability to see what can be unburdened by what has been.
Ein wildfremder, unberechenbarer Künstler. All die anderen, ja, 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 ja.
We are demonstrating that when we have leadership in the highest offices in the land, including in the White House, who believe in
What we can do, and then when we push to make it so, it allows other people who perhaps before couldn't imagine it.
to now see how it works, and we are building then the movement in such a substantial way in terms of those who are coming into the rooms to be a part of what we know is in the best interest of obviously our country, but our world.
Man müsste die ganze Luftwaffenführung sofort aufhängen.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
Das ist unerhört. Unerhört. Der Russe steckt 12 Kilometer vom Stadtkern. Und ich erfahre das sozusagen auf Nachfrage.
Mein Führer, vielleicht handelt es sich ja wirklich um Fernfeuer. Sie erwähnten eine Eisenbahnbrücke über die Oder.
Ach, Unsinn.
I don't know about you all, but frankly, I could watch that one over and over again. And thank you very much indeed to channel legend Kissy May, who may or may not be my mother, for bringing that one to my attention. And now we're on the ABC feed, and we've got about 5 minutes until this thing starts. Yeah. So first, I think we need to set the parameters for the drinking game. If anybody has a different or better set of rules, feel free to shout it out in the chat. What I was thinking is, you have to drink every time Kamala says convicted felon or racist. And again, standard disclaimer, if you wind up perishing from ethanol poisoning, the host is not liable for anything having to do with that. What do I think is going to happen here? Well, the rules of the drinking game pretty much lead into it. I think that Ms. Harris, or Mrs. Emhoff, if you prefer, she is going to bombard Donald Trump with a constant barrage of personal attacks in the hopes that he responds in kind. And the best play for Trump, obviously, I know this is contrary to every instinct in his being. I know it is an uncharacteristic thing for him to do, but he should let all of that stuff roll off his back. And in addition, he should be more polite, more courteous, almost to the point of being obsequious than he has ever been in his life, because that will make her look absolutely terrible. When she is hurling insult after insult after insult after insult, and he just says, well, Madam Vice President, forgive me for saying, but that's how polite he should be. I know it's not a very Trumpy thing to do, but that's going to throw her completely off balance. And let's face it, she's not going to have very much trouble ruining herself. There's a half a dozen different ways she can ruin herself in this thing. That's just one of them. We might see all half dozen. Who knows? Now, my approach for this debate, I'm going to attempt to keep my verbal interjections to a minimum, because I went back and watched the previous debate live stream that we did last time. And why is it that the Democrats have a different candidate for every debate? I don't know. But I felt like when I went back and watched that one that there were a few too many times when we wound up talking over something that wound up being a big, significant moment. And I think the result of it was that we didn't realize in real time just how disastrous this thing was for Joe Biden. And I think we all expected that after the debate ended, no matter how terribly Biden did, that the denizens of the fake news media industrial complex were going to slather the lipstick on the pig and portray it as a smashing victory on his part, but they didn't do that. They didn't even attempt to do that. The man's political career was over within 72 hours after that debate ended. And part of the reason for that was that they still had the option at that time of swapping out their candidate for a different candidate. They no longer have that option, obviously. I mean, you can't just change your candidate every time there's a debate. I mean, can you? Especially not when your only backup is Tampon Tim Walz, the stolen valor guy. But that's about how I think this is going to go. I don't expect, unless something really spectacularly awful happens on the Kamala Harris side, that anything's going to happen tonight that really materially changes the balance. I think they would rather she not have to do this. This is almost certainly going to be the only debate there is. I can't expect they're going to want to put her on the debate stage twice. I thought up until today there was a non-zero chance that they would try and come up with some excuse not to put her on the debate stage at all, because I don't think there's any way that she can help herself, because we have reached, let's face it, we have reached the logical end point of the DEI agenda, where we now actually have a presidential nominee with zero political skills. She has never had to master the political skills that it takes to get elected to the local city council, much less the local school board, much less, a state assembly or state senate post or a district attorney. She hasn't had to do any of that because she has the correct genitals and an agreeably non-white skin tone. So as soon as they come out of this commercial break, I'm going to turn the ABC sound on. I am going to, as soon as they start the event, I am going to attempt to keep my verbal interjections to a minimum, because I don't want to talk over anything that might wind up being important. I will do most of my commenting in the chat, unless I come up with something really good to say. The rules of the debate, they're going to be the same rules that they had in the Biden debate. I don't know why the Democrats have been so insistent upon this particular set of rules, because I think this set of rules benefits Trump far more than it benefits their side. And I thought we saw ample evidence of that in the Biden debate, because there were a few instances where, because Trump's mic was muted, Biden said a thing, and Trump really wanted, as is his habit, to say the first thing that comes into his mind and come up with a spectacular zinger, but the muted mic forced him to not do that, which had two net effects. The first net effect was that it gave Biden more time to fumble around and be incoherent and just completely wreck himself. And it forced Trump to take a couple more minutes and think, maybe that first zinger that came into my head wasn't the right thing to say. Maybe I've got a couple minutes, 1 or 2 minutes here to come up with a better thing to say. And I thought that's what he wound up doing. All right, I'm going to turn the sound on here because I think we're pretty close. Yep. You see how well I timed that, ladies and gentlemen? That's because I'm a goddamn professional.
Back now in Philadelphia, about 28 minutes until the debate begins, a debate the whole world is watching because the decisions the next president makes will have a profound
I hate it when they lie about the start time.
In the world, from Ukraine to Russia and, of course, Israel. So let's start there with our Matt Gutman, who has spent months covering the conflict in the Middle East. And, Matt, I know this debate is being watched very closely there.
Very closely, Martha, and a former longtime advisor for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu told me that he's going to be watching very closely for what former President Trump has to say about Iran. He said for Netanyahu, both Harris and Trump are known quantities, but the advisor telling me that for Netanyahu, a Trump presidency would be a dream come true, especially because of the mounting scrutiny that Netanyahu has been under increasing allegations that he's been dragging his feet on this hostage deal and ceasefire, mounting even further after the release of that video showing the tunnel in which those 6 hostages were executed, including American Hirsch Goldberg-Pollen. That just a couple of hours ago. And if you ask Israelis and Palestinians what they're looking for from Vice President Harris, they're likely to say they want to know what she has to offer that is different from what the Biden administration has been doing the past several months. Despite massive efforts, they've promised that a deal is around the corner, but it remains elusive. And it's going to be a lot easier of a sell for the former president, who's never faced a crisis like this, but he's likely going to say and repeat what he said in the past, that if he were president...
He's never faced a crisis like this because he never created a crisis like this, you cocksucker.
Strong-armed Hamas and Netanyahu into a ceasefire and hostage deal that would have saved the lives of many Palestinians and, of course, those hostages, Martha.
A lot of challenges about that tonight for sure, Matt. Center of this, let's bring in Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Ian Pannell, who is in Ukraine. Closely watched there as well, Ian.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I spoke to an advisor to the president's office today, and he used one simple word: critical. It's critical what happens tonight. It's critical what happens in November, not just to Ukraine, but I think this sends strong signals to other critical areas in terms of foreign policy for the...
You know what? I'd rather listen to myself talk than listen to this idiot talk. One thing I wanted to point out before we start, and now that I have time, I guess I might as well, is we've heard a lot of speculation about whether Kamala Harris is going to lay out any sort of specific policy positions tonight. The answer to that is a hard no, because, I mean, let's face it, a lot of people on the left in recent years, they seem to have stopped understanding the difference between aspirational, platitudinal statements and actual policy positions. They seem to think that the former suffices in lieu of the latter, which it absolutely does not. Because when you just say nebulous pie-in-the-sky nonsense like, oh, we need to do something about such and such, that is not a policy position. We need to do more to help so-and-so. That is not a policy position. Policy positions are actually policy positions. And if Kamala Harris at this thing tonight actually does try to get into specific nuts and bolts policy positions, there is nothing that she can say that won't wind up being a backtrack or a flip-flop, because she has been all over the map on all of this stuff. I mean, we thought that we knew what all of her positions were back during her 2020 presidential campaign that never survived 2019, just like Joe Biden's 1988 campaign never survived 1987. You know, funny how history repeats itself, or maybe it rhymes, as George Lucas would say. But yeah, there's not going to be any hard policy. I think it is going to be just a cavalcade of personal assault upon Donald Trump, because that's the only play she has, really. She's going to try to do the same thing she did when she debated Mike Pence 4 years ago, which was just to say, to make herself look like a poor little abused woman being bullied by the awful mean white man. Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking right now. Yeah, I'm speaking. I'm sorry. I'm speaking. Even when she wasn't being interrupted, she kept saying that. She said that over dead air because apparently that was the only thing she was programmed to say.
This is one of those rare issues where she is taking a notably different tone from the president. She has been much more forceful in speaking out about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, stressing, yes, of course, Israel has a right to defend itself, but saying Palestinians also have the right to dignity, security, and freedom. Now, policy-wise, she is largely vowing to continue the policies of the Biden administration, but there is no question on this issue, she is facing the most pressure from Democratic voters. I've been at nearly every Harris rally so far, and at almost every one, she is interrupted by protesters eager to make their voices heard on that. They will be listening closely.
Very strong voting block there too, Rachel.
Yeah, they're going to be listening to that message. All right, so coming
very
up,
strong
Senator
voting
Tom
block,
Cotton
really?
and Governor Josh Shapiro are standing by with just about
there's millions of Hamas supporters hanging out all across the fruited plain. Is that what they're going with? There's an untapped undercurrent of American voters who just love terrorism.
Stale policies, no cheddar. Cheddar Bay 2024 is here to clean up the crumb. Come in now for a chance to win 4 years of free Red Lobster.
That's a freaking Red Lobster commercial. That's kind of sad.
Because one bite can unite.
So yeah, I mean, and if you all have different predictions, let me hear them. If you have different parameters for the drinking game, let me hear them. It was the best. That was the best thing I could come up with, because I think we are going to hear the term convicted felon more than once, more than twice, probably more than half a dozen times tonight. I think she's really going to hammer home on the convicted felon thing, because let's face it, she has a limited number of arrows in her quiver that she is able to use. And I don't think she really has any ideology. I don't think she's, frankly, smart enough to have an ideology. I think she probably has 15 or 20 paragraph length statements that she has had to memorize during her debate camp, or whatever you want to call it, that she's been doing the last week. And pro tip, if you need to go to a week of debate camp, you're not a good debater, and you're probably going to get your ass kicked. I really do love it when they ask Trump how much debate preparation he's been doing, and he says, why the hell would I need to do debate preparation? It's just a debate. And a lot of people seem to think that especially in the fake news media, taking the approach that the person Kamala Harris is debating against tonight is the Donald Trump of 2016. And he is not that. He is the Donald Trump of 2024 now. He's been doing this stuff quite a while, and he's gotten better at it each time he's done it. And, okay, are we back on the air now, or is this still freaking commercials? Yeah, I should probably read out the debate rules for anybody who's unfamiliar with them. Just give me a moment here. And it will be interesting to see. Like I said, I think there's going to be a rather stark contrast between the post-game cleanup operation for this debate as opposed to the previous Trump versus Biden debate, in which Biden's political career ended within a matter of 72 hours because the people in the fake news media decided, you know what? Even though we are a bunch of fake news performance artists, we can't hold this guy's hand anymore. We're done. We're going to have to chuck this motherfucker out the window and give us the woman of color. And I think we've seen where her ceiling is, frankly. And it is a low ceiling. I don't think anybody on either side, no matter how hardcore of a supporter you are of hers, sees any possibility that she is going to win this debate on her own. Her best hope is to chuck the bait in the water with the personal attacks and have Trump eagerly gobble it up. And because if he is responding in kind to personal attacks, that is exactly what they want. Because as long as he is doing that, every minute he spends doing that, he is not taking this failed administration to task for its many disastrous policy failures. And that's what he needs to be doing. And we are seeing a thing that is unprecedented in our history in this election, which is that the party in power is attempting to make the election a referendum on the challenger. And it is a very awkward look indeed. Let's turn this back on.
Harris, or is it going to be the Donald Trump that's going to focus on his issues?
John, I think you're going to see that Donald Trump, who's president for 4 years, who has a clear record. This campaign is unusual. We don't have a candidate running for office for the first time. The American people remember what it was like under President Trump. We had stable prices, rising wages, a secure border, and peaceful, stable relations around the world. Under Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, we've had record high inflation. We've had a wide open border. We've had war breaking out everywhere. The American people are going to remember after tonight that times were good under Donald Trump, and they want another 4 years of President Trump back in the White House.
And we noticed he was spending a lot of time looking at the angles, studying the debate stage. He does know the television of this as well.
Well, he does, but I think the style and the debate stage and the lighting and all that is going to be secondary in the minds of most voters, especially those trying to make up their minds to what they hear from the two candidates about their record. People remember that with Donald Trump, they had good times. They had rising wages. They had stable prices. We had peace and stability. And with Kamala Harris, a dangerous San Francisco liberal, and Joe Biden in the White House, we've had none of that. So I think it's going to be a clear contrast between President Trump and Kamala Harris tonight, and the American people, starting tonight and over the next 8 weeks, are going to make the decision that they want President Trump back in the White House.
All right, there's Senator Cotton with one side of this debate, very sharply worded. Mary, the other side.
For the other side now, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro joins us.
Yeah, I don't think we need to hear the other side. As promised, here is the full set of the debate rules. There is a 90-minute time limit. There will be 2 commercial breaks. So I guess that'll give us a couple of opportunities to do a bit of mid-game analysis, halftime analysis, if you will. No audience in the room. Only the moderators will ask questions, which seems reasonable. Microphones will only be live for the candidate whose turn it is to speak, which, again, I think benefits Trump massively more than it benefits either Biden or Harris. I don't know why their side was so hardcore about making that stipulation. Maybe they're just a bunch of idiots. It could be. No opening statements. 2 minutes to answer each question with a 2-minute rebuttal. 1 minute for follow-up, clarification, or response. Via coin flip, Trump selected to give the last closing statement. Harris has selected the right side podium position. Wonder what went into that. There will be no props, so nobody gets to bring a little chihuahua on stage, I guess. No pre-written notes. Each party will have a pen, a pad of paper, and a bottle of water. And campaign staff will not coach candidates during commercial breaks. It's just like tennis. You can't coach your player during the game. I never really understood that rule about tennis, but I guess debates are the same as tennis. So there you are. All right, back to Josh Shapiro, the guy who was the screamingly obvious running mate candidate, but we can't pick him because he's a Jew, because apparently that's just where we are now with the Democrats.
Donald Trump. We will see how it unfolds on the debate stage. Governor Shapiro, thank you so much.
See how well I timed that?
Talk to surrogates from both campaigns. Coming up, we are going to talk to somebody who has both debated Donald Trump and helped him prepare for big debates, with tonight's showdown less than 14 minutes away.
Ooh, less than 14 minutes. All right, what else do we have? Come on, StreamYard. Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm not sure how to say I am Oz. Who are you? If I'm getting that wrong, please do pardon me. But yeah, thank you very much for the kind words and for being here. Very glad to have you. All right, let me get back to I actually do have some very shambolic notes here. Let me not as though I can't extemporize perfectly well on my own, but I'm just saying. Is there anybody in the chat that I missed? Kissy May, how many people remain undecided? 10 or 12? Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at before when I said that I don't think there is much that can happen in this debate that is going to materially change the equation. Is your stream delayed, razor fisted? I'm afraid I don't know what that means. Anyway. Another thing I found interesting about this this sort of shambolic excuse for a campaign that Kamala Harris is running, and the people running it must be completely off their heads on drugs, because it's almost like they don't want to win sometimes. But I think we've seen that her ceiling in terms of the national vote is a tie, and that's terrible. That's so very terrible for the Democrats. And let me tell you why. Not only because, as we know, Trump always gets undersampled in the polls, and he always does better in the election than he did in any of the polls, because, let's face it, many Trump voters have no desire to talk to pollsters. They do their talking at the ballot box. But they threw Biden out the window. You know, Nancy Pelosi shoved the knife in his ribs while Kamala threw him out the window, and then Hakeem Jeffries drove a truck over him. And then we got several weeks of the most obsequious, fawning coverage that you could ever imagine from the same fake news media that just a few weeks previous were pointing out the fact, which is a true fact, that she is the most intensely unpopular vice president since it first ever occurred to anybody to start keeping track of vice presidential approval ratings. And the best they were able to do was a tie, and now she's sliding back rather precipitously. The numbers, they keep getting worse every day, frankly. She's getting destroyed in a lot of constituencies where she has to do well. Not just in the swing states, but and I hate racial dividing lines in voting analysis, but she's just getting crushed with white men. She's not doing nearly as well as she should be doing with women, which is a hell of a thing, because when you listen to the platitudinal language that is coming out of this campaign, it is so calculated to appeal to females, and apparently she's not even doing that. She brought in this idiot Minnesota governor, arguably the most radical leftist governor in the history of the United States, because she thought that he was going to. I think the thinking that went into it was, Shapiro is the obvious guy. He's the well-liked governor of a must-win swing state, but he's a Jew, and we don't want to upset the terrorist sympathizer wing of the party. The number two obvious choice should have been Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona. He's got national security street cred from being a former NASA astronaut. He is reasonably unreviled by the people of his state, though it keeps getting worse. But he does have the advantage of not being a stolen valor bastard and being able to speak his own native language in some sort of coherent fashion. He would have been the natural, obvious backup choice. Instead, they choose the most radical governor in U.S. history, who is from a state that is so deep, deep blue, even freaking Walter Mondale won the thing in an election where Ronald Reagan won the other 49 states. So what advantage Tampon Tim was supposed to confer upon this ticket, frankly, I don't have the faintest idea. Oh, Chris Christie, let's listen to this jackass.
He's not really being spoken to. A little small talk here and there, but nobody's trying to give him any kind of clues.
So let me ask you the question. Let me ask you the question I tried to ask Tom Cotton. He didn't exactly give me an answer, but you will. Which Trump is going to show up tonight? You know what I mean by that. Which Trump?
I think at the beginning of the debate, the Trump who will show up will be the calmer Donald Trump. He knows inherently after the 2020 first debate against Joe Biden that the other Donald Trump is not the one that's a winning formula. The question's going to be, will he be able to continue to maintain that approach through questioning by David and Lindsey and through any comments that Vice President Harris makes in his direction? And that'll be the key to how he performs tonight.
And you and I were talking, you helped prepare him for those 2016 debates against Hillary Clinton. He told you that he had respect for Hillary Clinton, that Hillary Clinton was smart as you were preparing. What about Kamala Harris? We hear not the same.
Well,
that's a polite way of calling her an idiot.
In any way. And I can tell you that in 2016, he would regularly say during the many debate prep sessions that we had with him that Hillary Clinton was smart, that she was a good debater, that she was not to be taken lightly. And I don't think there was ever a moment in 2016 where he took her lightly. I do think he took Joe Biden lightly in 2020. And clearly during the prep sessions that I had with him, it was very, very difficult to get him to focus on what Joe Biden might or might not do in that first debate. And I think his performance in part reflected that. So the question's going to be, is what he's saying publicly what he really believes? We know that often with Donald Trump, that's performance. But I will tell you that in his 2016 prep, he was serious about getting ready for Hillary Clinton. In his 2020 debate prep, he was completely unserious about getting ready for Joe Biden. I think performances in both those debates reflected that approach.
All right, Chris Christie, you'll be watching with us. Martha?
And we have about 6 minutes left before the debate, so let's bring in Donna Brazile, formerly of the DNC, and Reince Priebus.
No, I can't do no Donna Brazile.
Donna,
Sorry, folks. That's where I draw the line. Here's a terrible bit of news that just dropped for the Democrats. A poll shows that former President Donald Trump has made significant gains with independents and Hispanics, going up 14 points with the former and 19 points with the latter, surveying 1,529 registered voters between September 3rd and 5th with a margin of error of 3.2 points. An NPR PBS News Marist poll showed some surprising results for the former president. Per the New York Post, Trump jumped ahead of Harris with a 3-point lead among independents in a multi-candidate contest, 49% to 46%, gaining significant ground since the August poll in which he trailed Harris by 11 points, 48 to 37%. In between the August and September polls, RFK Jr., who notched 12% in the primary and in the prior survey, dropped out of the race and endorsed Trump. Additionally, Harris's honeymoon, which you might call a nice back rub, maybe a good spa day, from her abrupt ascension to the nomination appears to have begun leveling out, as we were talking about just a moment ago. With Hispanics, Trump overtook Vice President Harris by 4 points, 51 to 47, since August, when the vice president stood at 54% and Trump trailed at 39%. So, to put it another way, she is absolutely hemorrhaging support, and Trump is happy to take all the people who abandon her, which seems they seem to be pretty numerous. When Trump and Harris square off in Philadelphia, the stakes are sky high because the contest is so close. Only single digits separate the candidates on most of the issues important to voters, but voters who value honesty are overwhelmingly for Harris. Oh man, there's a quote for you. And voters looking for strong leadership are mostly in Trump's corner. Will this still be the case on Wednesday morning? Well, I suppose we will see, my friend, won't we?
Can he be disciplined about talking about policies and what kind of president he will be?
Well, he certainly can be. I mean, the reality is Donald Trump doesn't have a lot to lose tonight. I mean, his support has always been almost unmovable. So the second piece is the honeymoon, I think, is over for Kamala Harris. And you all kind of touched on it with Donna. Kamala Harris has to answer for the state of the economy that she took a role in.
I don't know why we would be lagging, but let me refresh the window in case we've picked up a lag somewhere.
Restaurant bread, stale policies,
After we
no
sit through
cheddar.
this ad.
Cheddar Bay 2024 is here to clean up the crumbs. Come in now for a chance to win 4 years of free Red Lobster, because one bite can unite all parties, at least for dinner.
Thank you.
We're going to turn now to immigration and border security. We know it's an issue that's important to Republicans, Democrats, voters across the board in this country. Vice President Harris, you were tasked by President Biden with getting to the root causes of migration from Central America. We know that illegal border crossings reached a record high in the Biden administration. This past June, President Biden imposed tough new asylum restrictions. We know the numbers since then have dropped significantly. But my question to you tonight is, why did the administration wait until 6 months before the election to act? And would you have done anything differently from President Biden on this?
So I'm the only person on this stage who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations for the trafficking of guns, drugs, and human beings. And let me say that the United States Congress, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, came up with a border security bill which I supported. And that bill would have put 1,500 more border agents on the border to help those folks who are working there right now overtime trying to do their job. It would have allowed
the people you compared to the
stem
KKK?
The flow of fentanyl coming into the United States. I know there are so many families watching tonight who have been personally affected by the surge of fentanyl in our country. That bill would have put more resources to allow us to prosecute transnational criminal organizations for trafficking in guns, drugs, and human beings. But you know what happened to that bill? Donald Trump got on the phone, called up some folks in Congress, and said, kill the bill. And you know why? Because he'd prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And understand, this comes at a time where the people of our country actually need a leader who engages in solutions, who actually addresses the problems at hand. But what we have in the former president is someone who would prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And I'll tell you something, he's going to talk about immigration a lot tonight, even when it's not the subject that is being raised. And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom. And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, and your desires. And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first, and I pledge to you that I will.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump, on that point, I want to get your response.
Well, I would like to respond.
Let me just ask, though, why did you try to kill that bill, and successfully so? That would have put thousands of additional agents and officers on the border.
First, let me respond as to the rallies. She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there, and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. That's because people want to take their country back. Our country is being lost. We're a failing nation. And it happened 3.5 years ago. And what's going on here, you're going to end up in World War III, just to go into another subject. What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame. As far as rallies are concerned, as far as the reason they go is they like what I say. They want to bring our country back. They want to make America great again. It's a very simple phrase, make America great again. She's destroying this country, and if she becomes president, this country doesn't have a chance of success. Not only success, we'll end up being Venezuela on steroids.
I just want to clarify here. You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is the
people on television say my dog was taken and used for food. So maybe he said that, and maybe that's a good thing to say for a city manager.
I'm not taking this from television.
But the people on television saying their dog was eaten by the people that went there.
Again, the Springfield city manager says there's no evidence of that. Vice President Harris, I'll let you respond to the rest of what you've heard.
You talk about extreme. You know, this is, I think, one of the reasons why in this election, I actually have the endorsement of 200 Republicans who have formerly worked with President Bush, Mitt Romney, and John McCain, including the endorsement of former Vice President Dick Cheney and Congress member Liz Cheney. And if you want to really know the inside track on who the former president is, if he didn't make it clear already, just ask people who have worked with him. His former chief of staff, a 4-star general, has said he has contempt for the Constitution of the United States. His former national security advisor has said he is dangerous and unfit. His former Secretary of Defense has said the nation, the Republic, would never survive another Trump term. And when we listen to this kind of rhetoric, when the issues that affect the American people are not being addressed, I think the choice is clear in this election.
President Trump, I'll give you a quick minute to respond here.
Thank you, because when I hear that, see, I'm a different kind of a person. I fired most of those people. Not so graciously. They did bad things or a bad job. I fired them. They never fired one person. They didn't fire anybody having to do with Afghanistan and the Taliban and the 13 people whose were just killed, viciously and violently killed. And I got to know the parents and the family. They didn't fire. They should have fired all those generals, all those top people, because that was one of the most incompetently handled situations anybody has ever seen. So when somebody does a bad job, I fire him. And you take a guy like Esper. He was no good. I fired him. So he writes a book. Another one writes a book. Because with me, they can write books. With nobody else can they. But they have done such a poor job, and they never fire anybody. Look at the economy. Look at the inflation. They didn't fire any of their economists. They have the same people. That's a good way not to have books written about you. But just to finish, I got more votes than any Republican in history by far. In fact, I got more votes than any president, sitting president in history by far.
Let me continue on immigration. It was what you wanted to talk about earlier, so let's get back to your deportation proposal that the vice president has reacted to as well. President Trump, you call this the largest domestic deportation operation in the history of our country. You say you would use the National Guard. You say if things get out of control, you'd have no problem using the U.S. military.
Police, yes.
You also said you would use local police. How would you deport 11 million undocumented immigrants? I know you believe that number is much higher. Take us through this. What does this look like? Will authorities be going door to door in this country?
Yeah, it is much higher because of them. They allowed criminals, many millions of criminals. They allowed terrorists. They allowed common street criminals. They allowed people to come in, drug dealers, to come into our country. And they're now in the United States and told by their countries like Venezuela, don't ever come back or we're going to kill you. Do you know that crime in Venezuela and crime in countries all over the world is way down? You know why? Because they've taken their criminals off the street and they've given them to her to put into our country. And this will be one of the greatest mistakes in history for them to allow. And I think they probably did it because they think they're going to get votes, but it's not worth it because they're destroying the fabric of our country by what they've done. There's never been anything done like this at all. They've destroyed the fabric of our country. Millions of people let in. And all over the world, crime is down all over the world except here. Crime here is up and through the roof. Despite their fraudulent statements that they made, crime in this country is through the roof. And we have a new form of crime. It's called migrant crime. And it's happening at levels that nobody thought possible.
President Trump, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country. But Vice
Excuse me,
President
the
Harris,
FBI they were defrauding statements. They didn't include the worst cities. They didn't include the cities with the worst crime. It was a fraud, just like their number of 818,000 jobs that they said they created turned out to be a fraud.
President Trump, thank you. I'll let you respond, Vice President Harris.
Well, I think this is so rich coming from someone who has been prosecuted for
Here we go.
national security crimes, economic crimes, election interference, has been found liable for sexual assault.
There it
and
is.
His next big court appearance is in November at his own criminal sentencing. And let's be clear, where each person stands on the issue of what is important about respect for the rule of law and respect for law enforcement. The former vice president called for defunding federal law enforcement, 45,000 agents, get this, on the day after he was arraigned on 34 felony counts. So let's talk about what is important in this race. It is important that we move forward, that we turn the page on this same old tired rhetoric and address the needs of the American people, address what we need to do about the housing shortage, which I have a plan for, address what we must do to support
Where's it been
our
for
small
4 years,
businesses,
sweetheart?
address bringing down the price of groceries. But frankly,
Where's it been for
the
4
American
years,
people are
sweetheart?
exhausted with this same old tired playbook.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
Excuse me. Every one of those cases was started by them against their political opponent. And I'm winning most of them, and I will win the rest on appeal. And you saw that with the decision that came down just recently from the Supreme Court. I'm winning most of them. But those are cases, it's called weaponization. Never happened in this country. They weaponized the Justice Department. Every one of those cases was involved with the DOJ, from Atlanta and Fani Willis to the Attorney General of New York and the DA in New York. Every one of those cases. And then they say, oh,
look at how
he was
self-satisfied
a criminal.
she is.
They're the ones that made them go after me. By the way, Joe Biden was found essentially guilty on the documents case. And what happened in my documents case? They said, oh, that's the toughest of them all. A complete and total victory. 2 months ago, it was thrown out. It's weaponization, and they used it, and it's never happened in this country. They used it to try and win an election. They're fake cases.
President Trump, thank you. A really quick response here, Vice President Harris, on this notion of weaponization of the Justice Department.
Well, let's talk about extreme and understand the context in which this election in 2024 is taking place. The United States Supreme Court recently ruled that the former president would essentially be immune from any misconduct if he were to enter the White House again. Understand, this is someone who has openly said he would terminate, I'm quoting, terminate the Constitution of the United States, that he would weaponize the Department of Justice against his political enemies. Someone who has openly expressed disdain for members of our military. Understand what it would mean if Donald Trump were back in the White House with no guardrails, because certainly we know now the court won't stop him. We know J.D. Vance is not going to stop him. It's up to the American people
Vice President
to stop
Harris,
him.
thank you. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president.
This is the one that weaponized, not me. She weaponized. I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me. They talk about democracy. I'm a threat to democracy. They're the threat to democracy with a fake Russia investigation
We do have a lot
that
to get.
went nowhere.
We have a lot to get to. Lindsay?
Vice President Harris, in your last run for president, you said you wanted to ban fracking. Now you don't. You wanted mandatory government buyback programs for assault weapons. Now your campaign says you don't. You supported decriminalizing border crossings. Now you're taking a harder line. I know you say that your values have not changed. So then why have so many of your policy positions changed?
That was almost a tough question.
My values have not changed, and I'm going to discuss every one of the, at least every point that you've made. But in particular, let's talk about fracking because we're here in Pennsylvania. I made that very clear in 2020. I will not ban fracking. I have not banned fracking as Vice President of the United States. And in fact, I was the tie-breaking vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which opened new leases for fracking. My position is that we have got to invest in diverse sources of energy so we reduce our reliance on foreign oil. We have had the largest increase in domestic oil production in history because of an approach that recognizes that we cannot over-rely on foreign oil. As it relates to my values, let me tell you, I grew up a middle-class kid raised by a hardworking mother who
grew up on the
worked
richest
and
street in
saved
French goddamn
and was able to
Canada.
buy our first home when I was a teenager. The values I bring to the importance of home ownership, knowing not everybody got handed $400 million on a silver platter and then filed bankruptcy 6 times, is a value that I bring to my work to say we are going to work with the private sector and home builders to increase 3 million homes, increase by 3 million homes by the end of my first term. My work that is related to having a friend when I was in high school who was sexually assaulted by her stepfather. And my focus on protecting women and children from violent crime is based on a value that is deeply grounded in the importance of standing up for those who are most vulnerable. My work that is about protecting Social Security and Medicare is based on long-standing work that I have done, protecting seniors from scams. My values have not changed. And what is important is that there is a president who actually brings values and a perspective that is about lifting people up and not beating people down and name calling. The true measure of the leader is the leader who actually understands the strength is not in beating people down, it's in lifting people up. I intend to be that president.
President Trump, your
Well,
response?
first of all, I wasn't given $400 million. I wish I was. My father was a Brooklyn builder, Brooklyn, Queens, and a great father, and I learned a lot from him. But I was given a fraction of that, a tiny fraction, and I built it into many, many billions of dollars, many, many billions. And when people see it, they are even surprised. So we don't have to talk about that. Fracking, she's been against it for 12 years. Defund the police, she's been against that forever. She gave all that stuff up very wrongly, very horribly, and everybody's laughing at it, okay? They're all laughing at it. She gave up at least 12 and probably 14 or 15 different policies. Like, she was big on defund the police. In Minnesota, she went out, wait a minute, I'm talking now, if you don't mind, please.
Oh, zing!
She went out in Minnesota and wanted to let criminals that killed people, that burned down Minneapolis, she went out and raised money to get them out of jail. She did things that nobody would ever think of. Now she wants to do transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison. This is a radical left liberal that would do this. She wants to confiscate your guns, and she will never allow fracking in Pennsylvania. If she won the election, fracking in Pennsylvania will end on day one. Just to finish one thing, so important in my opinion. So I got the oil business going like nobody has ever done before. When they took over, they got rid of it, started getting rid of it, and the prices were going up the roof. They immediately let these guys go to where they were. I would have been 5 times, 4 times, 5 times higher, because you're talking about 3.5 years ago. They got it up to where I was because they had no choice, because the prices of energy were quadrupling and doubling. You saw what happened to gasoline. So they said, let's go back to Trump. But if she won the election, the day after that election, they'll go back to destroying our country, and oil will be dead, fossil fuel will be dead. We'll go back to windmills, and we'll go back to solar, where they need a whole desert to get some energy to come out of. You ever see a solar plant? By the way, I'm a big fan of solar, but they take 400, 500 acres of desert
President
soil.
Trump, we have a
These
lot
are
of
not good
issues
things
that we
for the
have to get
environment,
to.
as
We're
she
out of time.
understands.
Thank you.
Lindsay, thank you. We have an election in just 56 days. And I want to talk about the peaceful transfer of power, which, of course, we all know is a cornerstone of our democracy, and the role of a president in a moment of crisis. Mr. President, on January 6th, you told your supporters to march to the Capitol. You said you would be right there with them. The country and the world saw what played out at the Capitol that day, the officers coming under attack. Aides in the West Wing say you watched it unfold on television off the Oval Office. You did send out tweets, but it was more than 2 hours before you sent out that video message telling your supporters to go home. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day?
You just said a thing that isn't covered. Peacefully and patriotically, I said during my speech, not later on. Peacefully and patriotically. Yep. And nobody on the other side was killed. Ashley Babbitt was shot by an out-of-control police officer that should have never, ever shot her. It's a disgrace. But we didn't do this group of people that have been treated so badly. I ask, what about all the people that are pouring into our country and killing people that she allowed to pour in? She was the border czar, remember that. She was the border czar. She doesn't want to be called the border czar because she's embarrassed by the border. In fact, she said at the beginning, oh, I'm surprised you're not talking about the border yet. That's because she knows what a bad job they've done. What about those people? When are they going to be prosecuted? When are these people from countries all over the world, not just South America, they're coming in from all over the world, David, all over the world, and crime rates are down all over the world because of it.
But let me just
when
ask
are those, David, when are those people going to be prosecuted? When are the people that burned down Minneapolis going to be prosecuted? Or in Seattle, they went into Seattle, they took over a big percentage of the city of Seattle. When are those people going to be prosecuted?
But let me just ask
you. You might ask her that question.
You were the president. You were watching it unfold on television. It's a very simple question as we move forward toward another election. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day? Yes or no?
I had nothing to do with that other than they asked me to make a speech. I showed up for a speech. I said, I think it's going to be big. I went to Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington, D.C., and the mayor put it back in writing, as you know. I said, you know, this is going to be a very big rally or whatever you want to call it. And again, it wasn't done by me. It was done by others. I said, I'd like to give you 10,000 National Guard or soldiers. They rejected me. Nancy Pelosi rejected me. It was just 2 weeks ago. Her daughter has a tape of her saying she is fully responsible for what happened. They want to get rid of that tape. It would have never happened if Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington did their jobs. I wasn't responsible for security. Nancy Pelosi was responsible. She didn't do her job.
The question was about you as president, not about former Speaker Pelosi. But I do want Vice President Harris to respond here.
I was at the Capitol on January 6th. I was the vice president-elect. I was also an acting senator. I was there. And on that day, the President of the United States incited a violent mob to attack our nation's capital, to desecrate our nation's capital. On that day, 140 law enforcement officers were injured, and some died.
No, they
And
didn't.
understand, the
Stop lying.
former president has been indicted and impeached for exactly that reason. But this is not an isolated situation. Let's remember Charlottesville, where
Oh, for
there
Christ's
was
sake.
a mob of people carrying tiki torches, spewing anti-Semitic hate. And what did
Stop
the
copy
president
pasting
then
Joe
at the
Biden's
time
lines.
say? There were fine people on each side. Let's remember that when it came to the Proud Boys, a militia, the president said, the former president said, stand back and stand by. So for everyone watching who remembers what January 6th was, I say we don't have to go back. Let's not go back. We're not going back. It's time to turn the page. And if that was a bridge too far for you, well, there is a place in our campaign for you.
But
to
sweetheart, you're the
stand
party in power.
for country, to stand for our democracy, to stand for rule of law, and to end the chaos, and to end the approach that is about attacking the foundations of our democracy because you don't like the outcome. And be clear on that point. Donald Trump, the candidate, has said in this election there will be a bloodbath if this and the outcome of this election is not to his liking.
Oh, she went to the
Let's turn the page
bloodbath
on
hoax.
this.
She actually
Let's
went to
not
the
go back.
bloodbath hoax.
Let's
Jesus
chart
Christ.
a course for the future and not go backwards to the past.
Let me just follow up here.
It was a different term, and it was a term that related to energy because they have destroyed our energy business. That was where bloodbath was. Also, on Charlottesville, that story has been, as you would say, debunked. Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, Jesse, all of these people, they covered it. If they go an extra sentence, they will see it was perfect. It was debunked in almost every newspaper, but they still bring it up, just like they bring 2025 up. They bring all of this stuff up. I ask you this, you talk about the Capitol. Why are we allowing these millions of people to come through on the southern border? How come she's not doing anything? And I'll tell you what I would do, and I would be very proud to do it. I would say we would both leave this debate right now. I'd like to see her go down to Washington, D.C. during this debate because we're wasting a lot of time. Go down to, because she's been so bad, it's so ridiculous. Go down to Washington, D.C. and let her sign a bill to close up the border because they have the right to do it. They don't need bills. They have the right to do it. The President of the United States, you'll get him out of bed. You'll wake him up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You'll say, come on down to the office. Let's sign a bill. If he signs a bill that the border is closed, all he has to do is say it to the Border Patrol, who are phenomenal. If they do that, the border is closed.
Mr.
Those
President,
people are killing many people, unlike J6.
We talked immigration here tonight. I do want to focus on this next issue to both of you because it really brings us this into focus, truth in these times that we're living in. Mr. President, for 3.5 years after you lost the 2020 election, you repeatedly falsely claimed that you won, many times saying you won in a landslide. In the past couple of weeks leading up to this debate, you have said, quote, you lost by a whisker, that you, quote, didn't quite make it, that you came up a little bit short.
I said that?
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge that at all.
But
I
you
said
did
that
say
sarcastically.
But
You know
those-
that. It was said, oh, we lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically. Look, there's so much proof. All you have to do is look at it. And they should have sent it back to the legislatures for approval. I got almost 75 million votes, the most votes any sitting president has ever gotten. I was told if I got 63, which was what I got in 2016, you can't be beaten.
This is the last thing he should be talking
People should never
about.
be thinking about it. An election is fraudulent. We need two things. We need walls. we need, and we have to have it. We have to have borders, and we have to have good elections. Our elections are bad. And a lot of these illegal immigrants coming in, they're trying to get them to vote. They can't even speak English. They don't even know what country they're in practically. And these people are trying to get them to vote. And that's why they're allowing them to come into our country.
I did watch all of these pieces of video. I didn't detect the sarcasm, lost by a whisker. We didn't quite make it. And we should just point out here as clarification, and you know this, you and your allies, 60 cases in front of many judges, many of them Republican.
No judge looked at it.
And said
they
there was
said
no
we didn't have standing. That's the other thing. They said we didn't have standing, a technicality. Can you imagine a system where a person in an election doesn't have standing? The president of the United States doesn't have standing. That's how we lost. If you look at the facts, and I'd love to have you'll do a special on it. I'll show you Georgia, and I'll show you Wisconsin, and I'll show you Pennsylvania, and I'll show you. We have so many facts and statistics, but you know what? That doesn't matter because we have to solve the problem that we have right now.
If it doesn't matter, don't talk about it.
And the problem that we have right now is we have a nation in decline, and they have put it into decline. We have a nation that is dying, David.
Mr. President, thank you. Vice President Harris, you heard the president there tonight. He said he didn't say that he lost by a whisker. So he still believes he did not lose the election that was won by President Biden and yourself. But I do want to ask you about something that's come up in the last couple of days. This was a post from President Trump about this upcoming election just weeks away. He said, when I win, those people who cheated, and then he lists donors, voters, election officials, he says will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, which will include long-term prison sentences. One of your campaign's top lawyers responded saying, we won't let Donald Trump intimidate us. We won't let him suppress the vote. Is that what you believe he's trying to do here?
Up talking croaky voice.
solution. There must be security for the Israeli people and Israel, and in equal measure for the Palestinians. Give Israel the ability to defend itself, in particular as it relates to Iran and any threat that Iran and its proxies pose to Israel. But we must have a two-state solution where we can rebuild Gaza, where the Palestinians have security, self-determination, and the dignity they so rightly deserve.
President Trump, how would you negotiate with Netanyahu and also Hamas in order to get the hostages out and prevent the killing of more innocent civilians in Gaza?
If I were president, it would have never started. If I were president, Russia would have never, ever, I know Putin very well, he would have never, and there was no threat of it either, by the way, for 4 years, have gone into Ukraine and killed millions of people when you add it up, far worse than people understand what's going on over there. But when she mentions about Israel, all of a sudden, she hates Israel. She wouldn't even meet with Netanyahu when he went to Congress to make a very important speech. She refused to be there because she was at a sorority party of hers. She wanted to go to the sorority party. She hates Israel. If she's president, I believe that Israel will not exist within 2 years from now. And I've been pretty good at predictions, and I hope I'm wrong about that one. She hates Israel. At the same time, in her own way, she hates the Arab population because the whole place is going to get blown up. Arabs, Jewish people, Israel. Israel will be gone. It would have never happened. Iran was broke under Donald Trump. Now Iran has $300 billion because they took off all the sanctions that I had. Iran had no money for Hamas or Hezbollah or any of the 28 different spheres of terror. And they are spheres of terror, horrible terror. They had no money. It was a big story, and you know it. You covered it very well, actually. They had no money for terror. They were broke. Now they're a rich nation, and now what they're doing is they're spreading that money around. Look at what's happening with the Houthis and Yemen. Look at what's going on in the Middle East. This would have never happened. I will get that settled and fast, and I'll get the war with Ukraine and Russia ended. If I'm president-elect, I'll get it done before even becoming president.
Vice President Harris, he says you hate Israel.
That's absolutely not true. I have my entire career and life supported Israel and the Israeli people. He knows that. He's trying to, again, divide and distract from the reality, which is it is very well known that Donald Trump is weak and wrong on national security and foreign policy. It is well known that he admires dictators, wants to be a dictator on day one, according to himself. It is well known that he said of Putin that he can do whatever the hell he wants and go into Ukraine. It is well known that he said when Russia went into Ukraine, it was brilliant. It is well known he exchanged love letters with Kim Jong-un. And it is absolutely well known that these dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because they're so clear. They can manipulate you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace. That is why we understand that we have to have a president who is not consistently weak and wrong on
Vice
national
President
security,
Harris.
including the importance of upholding and respecting in highest regard our military.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
They're the ones, and she's the one that caused it, that's weak on national security by allowing every nation last month for the year, 168 different countries sending people into our country. Their crime rates are way down. Putin endorsed her last week, said, I hope she wins. And I think he meant it because what he's gotten away with is absolutely incredible. It wouldn't have happened with me. The leaders of other countries think that they're weak and incompetent, and they are. They're grossly incompetent. And I just ask one question. Why does Biden go in and kill the Keystone Pipeline and approve the single biggest deal that Russia's ever made, Nord Stream 2, the biggest pipeline anywhere in the world going to Germany and all over Europe? because they're weak and they're ineffective. And Biden, by the way,
President
gets paid
Trump,
a lot of money.
Thank you. We have a lot of issues to get to.
We'll be right back with much more of this historic ABC News presidential debate from the National Constitution Center right here in Philadelphia. Back in a moment.
All right, I guess there is much to unpack here, isn't there? I don't know how you all felt about that. I felt like he opened weak and finished a little bit stronger. I feel like he spent way too much time talking about things that he doesn't need to talk about. Nobody gives a shit about January 6th. Nobody gives a shit about Charlottesville. But having said that, I am glad he pointed out the manifestly obvious fact that only one person got killed on January 6th, and it was Ashley Babbitt, Air Force veteran, San Diego, California, shot fatally in the neck from a concealed position by a police officer who did not identify himself or give any warning, and he got a fucking medal. If it was me, I would prosecute him for murder, but, because I thought the Democrats were opposed to police brutality against unarmed protesters. Did I get that wrong? Because they always say that like it's a universal, immutable fact. Did I get that wrong? I feel like they think I got that wrong. She actually has the gall to say that police officers died. No, police officers didn't die. Some dude dropped dead from a heart attack a couple days later that was totally unrelated to anything that happened on January 6th, and they still want so badly to pin that obese cardiovascular disease having motherfucker's death on something Donald Trump said. And he pointed out correctly that the only thing he said was, I want you to go and peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. If it's not okay for a president to say that, then what the hell is it okay for a president to say? And he correctly pointed out also that the person who was the commander-in-chief of the DC National Guard and the DC Police on January 6th of 2021 was the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, because we have a really, really weird system of government as it pertains to our federal district, and it's probably something we need to figure out and change because it is really not a very good system. If you left it up to me, if you made me the president and made me a dictator on day one, you know what I would do? First of all, I would downsize the federal government by at least 70%, and that would be a marginally good start. I would take whatever is left, scatter it to the four winds, decentralize it, put it in Omaha, put it in Seattle, put it in Portland, Maine, put it in Miami, put it in Brownsville, Texas. I don't give a shit. Just get it the hell out of Washington, D.C., and then we should depopulate that city that was never really meant to have people living in it. I hate to say it, but that's a thing where Brazil has it figured out a hell of a lot better than we do. Because in Brazil, they don't have their capital in Rio de Janeiro. They have their capital in Sao Paulo, where they built a dedicated federal city whose only function is to be the center of the administration. And it's a nice, sort of museum, monument city where tourists can go and see the historical stuff. That's what Washington, D.C. should be. Washington, D.C. should not be a place where Americans are terrified to take their families to see the Lincoln Monument, Memorial, and the Washington Monument, and the Jefferson Memorial, and all of the beautiful old buildings. But you know what we have today? That is exactly what we have. People are terrified to take their families to Washington, D.C., and every American should be goddamn ashamed of that. And Nancy Pelosi was one of the main architects of creating that reality. Am I wrong? I don't think I'm wrong. Queenbird says, this bitch actually said he had love letters to the North Korea leader. It's called diplomacy. And yes, Queenbird, as ever, you are absolutely right. Because, who understands international diplomacy better? Donald Trump, the man who actually was president of the United States for 4 years and on whose watch no disastrous international wars were started because people were actually afraid of what he might do. And that's a important, useful quality for a president to have. Or Kamala Harris, who, let's call things what they are, who climbed a professional ladder made out of every penis in Sacramento and then managed to fail upward all the way to a heartbeat away from the presidency, despite having no evident political skills of which to speak. And sorry, we're back.
Best interest to do so, arguing that if Putin wins, he may be emboldened to move even further into other countries. You have said you would solve this war in 24 hours. You said so just before the break tonight. How exactly would you do that? And I want to ask you a very simple question tonight. Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop. I want to save lives that are being uselessly, people being killed by the millions. It's the millions. It's so much worse than the numbers that you're getting, which are fake numbers. Look, we're in for 250 billion or more.
Somebody told her to stop smirking.
Don't ask Europe, which is a much bigger beneficiary to getting this thing done than we are.
Thought there was no coaching.
$150 billion less because Biden and you don't have the courage to ask Europe like I did with NATO. They paid billions and billions, hundreds of billions of dollars when I said, either you pay up or we're not going to protect you anymore. So that's maybe one of the reasons they don't like me as much as they like weak people. But you take a look at what's happening. We're in for 250 to 275 billion. They're into 100 to 150. They should be forced to equalize. With that being said, I want to get the war settled. I know Zelensky very well, and I know Putin very well. I have a good relationship, and they respect your president, okay? They respect me. They don't respect Biden. How would you respect him? Why? For what reason? He hasn't even made a phone call in 2 years to Putin, hasn't spoken to anybody. They don't even try and get it. That is a war that's dying to be settled. I will get it settled before I even become president. If I win, when I'm president-elect, and what I'll do is I'll speak to one, I'll speak to the other, I'll get them together. That war would have never happened. And in fact, when I saw Putin after I left, unfortunately left because our country has gone to hell. But after I left, when I saw him building up soldiers, he did it after I left. I said, oh, he must be negotiating. It must be a good, strong point of negotiation. Well, it wasn't, because Biden had no idea how to talk to him. He had no idea how to stop it. And now you have millions of people dead, and it's only getting worse, and it could lead to World War III. Don't kid yourself, David. We're playing with World War III, and we have a president that we don't even know if he's... Where is our president? We don't even know if he's a president.
And just to clarify
they
here...
They threw him out of a campaign like a dog. We don't even know. Is he our president? But we have a president,
Mr. President,
that doesn't know he's alive.
Your time is up. Just to clarify in the
mic drop.
Do you believe it's in the U.S. best interests for Ukraine to win this war, yes or no?
I think it's the U.S. best interest to get this war finished and just get it done.
All right.
Negotiate a deal, because we have to stop all of these human lives from being destroyed.
I want to take this to Vice President Harris.
Best answer
I want to get
tonight.
your thoughts on support for Ukraine in this moment, but also as Commander-in-Chief, if elected, how would you deal with Vladimir Putin, and would it be any different from what we're seeing from President Biden?
Well, first of all, it's important to remind the former president, you're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me. I believe the reason that Donald Trump says that this war would be over within 24 hours is because he would just give it up. And that's not who we are as Americans. Let's understand what happened here. I actually met with Zelensky a few days before Russia invaded, tried through force to change territorial boundaries, to define one of the most important international rules and norms, which is the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity. And I met with President Zelensky. I shared with him American intelligence about how he could defend himself. Days later, I went to NATO's eastern flank, to Poland and Romania. And through the work that I and others did, we brought 50 countries together to support Ukraine in its righteous defense. And because of our support, because of the air defense, the ammunition, the artillery, the javelins, the Abrams tanks that we have provided, Ukraine stands as an independent and free country. If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now. And understand what that would mean, because Putin's agenda
is not just about Ukraine. Understand why the European allies and our NATO allies are so thankful that you are no longer president and that we
He made them pay their bills.
of the greatest military alliance the world has ever known, which is NATO, and what we have done to preserve the ability of Zelensky and the Ukrainians to fight for their independence. Otherwise, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch.
Vice President Harris, thank you. We've heard from both of you on Ukraine tonight. Afghanistan came up in the last hour. I wanted her to respond to something you said earlier. And now, please, I'll give you a minute here.
Putin would be sitting in Moscow, and he wouldn't have lost 300,000 men and women, but he would have been sitting in Moscow. Quiet, please. He would have been sitting in Moscow much happier than he is right now. But eventually, you know, he's got a thing that other people don't have. He's got nuclear weapons. They don't ever talk about that. He's got nuclear weapons. Nobody ever thinks about that. And eventually, maybe he'll use them, and maybe he hasn't been that threatening, but he does have that. Something we don't even like to talk about. Nobody likes to talk about it. But just so you understand, they sent her to negotiate peace before this war started. 3 days later, he went in and he started the war because everything they said was weak and stupid. They said the wrong things. That war should have never started. She was the emissary. They sent her in to negotiate with Zelensky and Putin, and she did. And the war started 3 days later. And that's the kind of talent we have with her. She's worse than Biden. In my opinion, I think he's the worst president in the history of our country. She goes down as the worst vice president in the history of our country. But let me tell you something. She is a horrible negotiator. They sent her in to negotiate. As soon as they left, Putin did the invasion.
President Trump, thank you. You did bring up something. You said she went to negotiate with Vladimir Putin. Vice President Harris, have you ever met Vladimir Putin? Can you clarify tonight?
Yet again, I said it at the beginning of this debate, you're going to hear a bunch of lies coming from this fellow. And that is another one. When I went to meet with President Zelensky, I've now met with him over 5 times. The reality
Over
is
5?
it has been
That means
about
6?
standing as America always should, as a leader upholding international rules and norms, as a leader who shows strength, understanding that the alliances we have around the world are dependent on our ability to look out for our friends and not favor our enemies because you adore strongmen instead of caring about democracy. And that is very much what is at stake here. The President of the United States is commander-in-chief. And the American people have a right to rely on a president who understands the significance of America's role and responsibility in terms of ensuring that there is stability and ensuring we stand up for our principles and not sell them for the benefit of personal flattery.
We've talked about Ukraine and Vladimir Putin. I do want to talk about Afghanistan. It came up in the first hour of this debate. I want to move on to Afghanistan.
Stoltenberg said Trump did the most amazing thing I've ever seen. He got these countries, the 28 countries at the time, to pay up. He said, I've never seen. He's the head of NATO. He said, I've never seen. For years, we were paying almost all of NATO. We were being ripped off by European nations, both on trade and on NATO. I got them to pay up by saying one of the statements you made before, if you don't pay, we're not going to protect you.
President
Otherwise,
Trump.
we would have never gotten it. He said it was one of the most incredible jobs that he's ever seen done.
Thank you. I want to turn to Afghanistan. It came up in the first hour of the debate, and we witnessed a poignant moment today on Capitol Hill, honoring the soldiers who died in the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. I do want to ask the Vice President, do you believe you bear
Soldiers,
any
sailors, and
responsibility
Marines,
in the
asshole.
way that withdrawal played out?
Well, I will tell you, I agreed with President Biden's decision to pull out of Afghanistan. 4 presidents said they would, and Joe Biden did. And as a result, America's taxpayers are not paying the $300 million a day we were paying for that endless war. And as of today, there is not one member of the United States military who is in active duty in a combat zone in any war zone around the world, the first time this century, But let's understand how we got to where we are. Donald Trump, when he was president, negotiated one of the weakest deals you can imagine. He calls himself a deal maker. Even his national security advisor said it was a weak, terrible deal. And here's how it went down. He bypassed the Afghan government. He negotiated directly with a terrorist organization called the Taliban. The negotiation involved the Taliban getting
the guys you surrendered to.
Taliban terrorists released. And get this, and the president at the time invited the Taliban to Camp David, a place of storied significance for us as Americans, a place where we honor the importance of American diplomacy, where we invite and receive respected world leaders. And this former president, as president, invited them to Camp David because he does not, again, appreciate the role and responsibility of the President of the United States to be commander-in-chief with a level of respect. And this gets back to the point of how he has consistently disparaged and demeaned members of our military, fallen soldiers, and the work that we must do to uphold the strength and the respect of the United States of America around the world.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump, your response to her saying that you began the negotiations with the Taliban.
So if you take a look at that period of time, the Taliban was killing our soldiers, a lot of them, with snipers. And I got involved with the Taliban because the Taliban was doing the killing. That's the fighting force within Afghanistan. They don't bother doing that because, they deal with the wrong people all the time. But I got involved. And Abdul is the head of the Taliban. He is still the head of the Taliban. And I told Abdul, don't do it anymore. You do it anymore, you're going to have problems. And he said, why do you send me a picture of my house? I said, you're going to have to figure that out, Abdul. And for 18 months, we had nobody killed. We did have an agreement negotiated by Mike Pompeo. It was a very good agreement. The reason it was good, we were getting out. We would have been out faster than them, but we wouldn't have lost the soldiers. We wouldn't have left many Americans behind, and we wouldn't have left $85 billion worth of brand new, beautiful military equipment behind. And just to finish, they blew it. The agreement said you have to do this, and they didn't do it. They didn't do it. The agreement was terminated by us because they didn't do what they were supposed to do.
I want to move on.
And these people did the worst withdrawal, and in my opinion, the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. And by the way, that's why Russia attacked Ukraine, because they saw how incompetent she and her boss are.
President Trump, thank you.
Yup.
I want to move on now to race and politics in this country. Mr. President, you recently said of Vice President Harris, quote, I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. I want to ask a bigger picture question here tonight. Why do you believe it's appropriate to weigh in on the racial identity of your opponent?
I don't, and I don't care. I don't care what she is. I don't care. You make a big deal out of something. I couldn't care less. Whatever she wants to be is okay with me.
But those were your words, so I'm asking.
I don't know. I mean, all I can say is I read where she was not black, that she put out, and I'll say that. And then I read that she was black, and that's okay. Either one was okay with me. That's up to her. That's up to her.
Vice President Harris, your thoughts on this?
I think honestly, I think it's a tragedy that we have someone who wants to be president who has consistently, over the course of his career, attempted to use race to divide the American people. I do believe that the vast majority of us know that we have so much more in common than what separates us, and we don't want this kind of approach that is just constantly trying to divide us, and especially by race. And let's remember how Donald Trump started. He was land, he owned land, he owned buildings, and he was investigated because he refused to rent property to black families. Let's remember, this is the same individual who took out a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for the execution of 5 young black and Latino boys who were innocent, the Central Park 5. took out a full-page ad calling for their execution. This is the same individual who spread birther lies about the first black president of the United States. And I think the American people want better than that, want better than this, want someone who understands, as I do, I travel our country. We see in each other a friend. We see in each other a neighbor. We don't want a leader who is constantly trying to have Americans point their fingers at each other. I meet with people all the time who tell me, can we please just have discourse about how we're going to invest in the aspirations and the ambitions and the dreams of the American people? Knowing that regardless of people's color or the language their grandmother speaks, we all have the same dreams and aspirations and want a president who invests in those, not in hate and division.
Vice President Harris, thank you. Lindsay?
President Trump, this is now your third time.
This is the most divisive presidency in the history of our country. There's never been anything like it. They're destroying our country, and they come up with things like what she just said. Going back many, many years, when a lot of people, including Mayor Bloomberg, agreed with me on the Central Park Five, they admitted, they said, they pled guilty. And I said, well, if they pled guilty, they badly hurt a person, killed a person ultimately. And if they pled guilty, then they pled, we're not guilty. But this is a person that has to stretch back years, 40, 50 years ago, because there's nothing now. I built one of the greatest economies in the history of the world, and I'm going to build it again. It's going to be bigger, better, and stronger. But they're destroying our economy. They have no idea what a good economy is. Their oil policies, every single policy. And remember this, she is Biden. You know, she's trying to get away from Biden. I don't know the gentleman, she says. She is Biden. The worst inflation we've ever had, a horrible economy because inflation has made it so bad, and she can't get away with that.
Thank you. Your time is up.
I want to respond to that, though. I want to just respond briefly. Clearly, I am not Joe Biden, and I am certainly not Donald
Almost got
Trump.
a cackle.
And what I do offer is a new generation of leadership for our country. One who believes in what is possible, one who brings a sense of optimism about what we can do instead of always disparaging the American people. I believe in what we can do to strengthen our small businesses, which is why I have a plan. Let's talk about our plans and let's compare the plans. I have a plan to give startup businesses $50,000 tax deduction, to pursue their ambitions, their innovation, their ideas, their hard work. I have a plan, $6,000 for young families for the first year of your child's life.
Why haven't you done it?
In that most critical stage of your child's development. I have a plan.
Why haven't you done it?
Allowing people to be able to pursue what has been fleeting in terms of the American dream by offering a help with down payment of $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. That's the kind of conversation, I believe, David, that people really want tonight, as opposed to a conversation that is constantly about belittling and name-calling. Let's turn the page
Vice President
and move
Harris,
forward.
thank you. Let's turn to policy.
President
Let's
Trump,
turn back
we
to
have
policy.
to move on. President Trump.
Let's turn to policy,
She has
please.
a plan to defund the police. She has a plan to confiscate everybody's gun.
President Trump,
she
we
has
do
a
have to
plan
move
to
on to
not
other
allow
issues.
fracking in Pennsylvania or anywhere else.
Okay. Thank
That's
you, Mr.
what her
President.
plan is until just recently.
I just need
Lindsay,
to
go ahead.
respond.
No,
because
Trump,
the
President
former
Trump.
president has
No,
said
I'm
something
sorry.
twice that I need to
No,
respond to.
I'm sorry.
I
We're
just
going
need
to move
respond
on. Vice
one
President
time
Harris.
to what he has
President
said
Trump, this
multiple
is now
times.
your
Yes.
third time running for president. You have long vowed to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. You have failed to accomplish that. You now say you're going to keep
Thank you, John
Obamacare,
McCain.
quote, unless we can do something much better. Last month, you said, quote, we're working on it. So tonight, 9 years after you first started running, do you have a plan, and can you tell us what it is?
Obamacare was lousy health care, always was. It's not very good today. And what I said, that if we come up with something, and we are working on things, we're going to do it and we're going to replace it. But remember this, I inherited Obamacare because Democrats wouldn't change it. They wouldn't vote for it. They were unanimous. They wouldn't vote to change it. If they would have done that, we would have had a much better plan than Obamacare. But the Democrats came up, they wouldn't vote for it. I had a choice to make when I was president. Do I save it and make it as good as it can be, never going to be great, or do I let it rot? And I felt I had an obligation, even though politically it would have been good to just let it rot and let it go away. I decided, and I told my people, the top people, and they're very good people. I have a lot of good people in that administration. We read about the bad ones. We had some real bad ones, too, and so do they. They have really bad ones. The difference is they don't get rid of them. But let me just explain. I had a choice to make. Do I save it and make it as good as it can be, or do I let it rot? And I saved it. I did the right thing. But it's still never going to be great, and it's too expensive for people. And what we will do is we're looking at different plans. If we can come up with a plan that's going to cost our people, our population, less money and be better health care than Obamacare, then I would absolutely do it. But until then, I'd run it as good as it can be run.
So just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan. I'm not president right now. But if we come up with something, I would only change it if we come up with something that's better and less expensive. And there are concepts and options we have to do that. And you'll be hearing about it in the not-too-distant future.
Vice President Harris, in 2017, you supported Bernie Sanders' proposal to do away with private insurance and create a government-run healthcare system. 2 years later, you proposed a plan that included a private insurance option. What is your plan today?
Well, first of all, I absolutely support, and over the last 4 years as vice president, private healthcare options. But what we need to do is maintain and grow the Affordable Care Act. But I'll get to that, Lindsay. I just need to respond to a previous point that the former president has made. I've made very clear my position on fracking. And then this business about taking everyone's guns away. Tim Walz and I are both gun owners. We're not taking anybody's guns away. So stop with the continuous lying about this stuff.
Shut the hell up.
As it relates to the Affordable Care Act, understand, just look at the history to know where people stand. When Donald Trump was president, 60 times he tried to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. 60 times. I was a senator at the time when I will never forget the early morning hours when it was up for a vote in the United States Senate. And the late, great John McCain, who you have disparaged as being, you don't like him, you said, at the time because he got caught. He was an American hero. The late, great John McCain, I will never forget that night, walked onto the Senate floor and said, no, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't get rid of the Affordable Care Act. You have no plan. And what the Affordable Care Act has done is eliminate the ability of insurance companies to deny people with pre-existing conditions. I don't have to tell the people watching tonight, you remember what that was like? Remember when an insurance company could deny if a child had asthma, if someone was a breast cancer survivor, if a grandparent had diabetes? And thankfully, as I've been vice president and we over the last 4 years have strengthened the Affordable Care Act, we have allowed for the first time Medicare to negotiate drug prices on behalf of you, the American people. Donald Trump said he was going to allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices. He never did. We did. And now we have capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month. Since I've been vice president, we have capped the cost of prescription medication for seniors at $2,000 a year. And when I am president, we will do that for all people, understanding that the value I bring to this is that access to health care should be a right and not just a privilege of those who can afford it. And the plan has to be to strengthen the Affordable Care Act, not get rid of it.
Vice President Harris, thank
in terms
you.
of where Donald Trump stands on that.
I want to move to an issue that's important for a lot
She made a mistake. Number one, John McCain fought Obamacare for 10 years. But it wasn't only him. It were all of the Democrats that kept it going. And you know what? We can do much better than Obamacare, much less money. But she won't improve private insurance for people, private medical insurance. That's another thing she doesn't want to get. People are paying privately for insurance that have worked hard and made money, and they want to have private. She wants everybody to be on government insurance where you wait 6 months for an operation that you need immediately.
President Trump, thank you. We have another issue that we'd like to get to that's important for a number of Americans, in particular younger voters, and that's climate change. President Trump, with regard to the environment, you say that we have to have clean air and clean water. Vice President Harris, you call climate change an existential threat. The question to you both tonight is, what would you do to fight climate change? And Vice President Harris, we'll start with you. 1 minute for you each.
Well, the former president had said that climate change is a hoax. And what we know is that it is very real. You ask anyone who lives in a state who has experienced these extreme weather occurrences, who now is either being denied home insurance or it's being jacked up. You ask anybody who has been the victim of what that means in terms of losing their home, having nowhere to go. We know that we can actually deal with this issue. The young people of America care deeply about this issue. And I am proud that as vice president over the last 4 years, we have invested $1 trillion in a clean energy economy, while we have also increased domestic gas production to historic levels. We have created over 800,000 new manufacturing jobs while I have been vice president. We have invested in clean energy to the point that we are opening up factories around the world. Donald Trump said he was going to create manufacturing jobs. He lost manufacturing jobs. And I'm also proud to have the endorsement of the United Auto Workers and Sean Fain, who also know that part of building a clean energy economy includes investing in American-made products, American automobiles. It includes growing what we can do around American manufacturing and opening up auto plants, not closing them like happened under Donald Trump.
Vice President Harris, thank you.
That didn't happen under Donald Trump. Let me just tell you, they lost 10,000 manufacturing jobs this last month. They're all leaving. They're building big auto plants in Mexico, in many cases owned by China. They're building these massive plants, and they think they're going to sell their cars into the United States because of these people. What they have given to China is unbelievable. But we're not going to let that. We'll put tariffs on those cars so they can't come into our country, because they will kill the United Auto Workers and any auto worker, whether it's in Detroit or South Carolina or any other place. What they've done to business and manufacturing in this country is horrible. We have nothing because they refuse. You know, Biden doesn't go after people because supposedly China paid him millions of dollars. He's afraid to do it. Between him and his son, they get all this money from Ukraine. They get all this money from all of these different countries. And then you wonder, why is he so loyal to this one, that one, Ukraine, China? Why is he? Why did he get $3.5 million from the mayor of Moscow's wife? Why did she pay him $3.5 million? This is a crooked administration, and they're selling our country down the tubes.
President Trump, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with closing statements from both of our candidates. An historic night, this ABC News presidential debate from Philadelphia. Back in a moment.
The ABC News presidential debate.
Well, I guess they weren't lying about 2 commercial breaks, were they? I thought the second part was better for Trump than the first part was. I did jot down a couple of notes. I was rather amused by Kamala going to the terrible, scary specter of the Russian bear, because if you let Putin take Ukraine, he's going to take all of Europe. So let me stop you right there, sweetheart. Let's pump the brakes for a second. So what's it been? 2.5 years now since Russia started attempting to conquer their much smaller, much weaker, much less populated country next door, and they haven't managed to do it. They have only managed to take over the portions of eastern Ukraine that are ethnically Russian anyway, that where the people who live there would view themselves as more Russian than Ukrainian. And let me tell you what, the status quo at the end of this war, whatever shape the end of this war takes, those ethnically Russian enclaves in eastern Ukraine are going to remain with Russia. And there's not a goddamn thing anybody can do about it. No matter how much blood and how much treasure, however many countries throw at the damn thing, that is going to be the status quo when this thing is over. And This ABC idiot keeps sitting there hammering on Trump. Well, do you think it's good if Ukraine wins the war? And he gives the correct answer. He says, I don't give a damn. I just want the war to stop. I want people to stop getting killed. And that's the correct answer because, amazingly, it's the liberal Democrats who are the neocon warmongers now. It takes a hell of a lot of getting used to, but that is where we are. And the people who want a negotiated peace and an end to the bloodshed and hundreds of thousands of people being killed, well, they get called a bunch of surrender monkeys. It's like the roles have completely reversed in the last 20 years. I'm still not quite sure what to make of it, frankly. I mean, I seem to remember all these same people who are the bloodthirsty neocon warmongers today. They were all marching against the Iraq War 20 years ago, and they were correct. They were absolutely correct. That war was horse shit. That war was horse shit all along. We expended completely absurd amounts of blood and treasure on that war in pursuit of nothing. And if you want to talk about bad presidents who got reelected, let's talk about George W. Bush in 2004, who started 2 open-ended foreign wars while cutting taxes, which only time anybody's ever attempted to do that, and it had predictable results. And he authored the biggest expansion of the central government since World War II. And that Republican president got reelected by a fairly healthy margin. Barack Obama in 2012 had a pretty uniformly disastrous first term. That guy also got reelected by a fairly comfortable margin. Yet Donald Trump, who had a pretty successful first term up until all the COVID nonsense, which admittedly he did not do a very good job of handling because he left the wrong people in charge and didn't fire them when it was abundantly clear that they were bad actors who were out to destroy him. He doesn't get reelected. That's why I have decided to get out of the business of prognosticating the results of future elections, because the last election in 2020, there was absolutely no historical precedent, and I like to be guided by historical precedent, that said Trump should have lost that election and not been reelected. Because in my experience, in my living memory, even the terrible presidents usually get reelected, and somehow he didn't. They called it. They shotgun blasted hundreds of millions of unsolicited mail ballots out to every voter living and dead. And they called it the most secure election in history, which it couldn't possibly be if you want to be technical, but here we go. I guess we're back.
Yeah. Here again, David Muir and Lindsay Davis.
Welcome back tonight. The time has come for closing statements, and Vice President Harris, we begin with you.
So I think you've heard tonight 2 very different visions for our country. One that is focused on the future, and the other that is focused on the past, and an attempt to take us backward. But we're not going back. And
You're the party in power!
That the American people know we all have so much more in common than what separates us, and we can chart a new way forward. And a vision of that includes having a plan, understanding the aspirations, the dreams, the hopes, the ambition of the American people, which is why I intend to create an opportunity economy, investing in small businesses, in new families, in what we can do around protecting seniors, what we can do that is about giving hardworking folks a break and bringing down the cost of living. I believe in what we can do together that is about sustaining America's standing in the world and ensuring that we have the respect that we so rightly deserve, including respecting our military and ensuring we have the most lethal fighting force in the world. I will be a president that will protect our fundamental rights and freedoms, including the right of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not have her government tell her what to do. I'll tell you, I started my career as a prosecutor. I was a DA.
Oh, you don't say.
I was an attorney general, a United States senator, and now vice president. I've only had one client, the people. And I'll tell you, as a prosecutor, I never asked a victim or a witness, are you a Republican or a Democrat? The only thing I ever ask them, are you okay? And that's the kind of president we need right now. Someone who cares about you and is not putting themselves first. I intend to be a president for all Americans and focus on what we can do over the next 10 and 20 years to build back up our country by investing right now in you, the American people.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump?
So she just started by saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for three and a half years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it? She should leave right now, go down to that beautiful White House, go to the Capitol, get everyone together and do the things you want to do, but you haven't done it and you won't do it because you believe in things that the American people don't believe in. You believe in things like we're not going to frack. We're not going to take fossil fuel. We're not going to do things that are going to make this country strong, whether you like it or not. Germany tried that, and within 1 year, they were back to building normal energy plants. We're not ready for it. We can't sacrifice our country for the sake of bad vision. But I just ask one simple question. Why didn't she do it? We're a failing nation. We're a nation that's in serious decline. We're being laughed at all over the world. All over the world, they're laughed. I know the leaders very well. They're coming to see me. They call me. We're laughed at all over the world. They don't understand what happened to us as a nation. We're not a leader. We don't have any idea what's going on. We have wars going on in the Middle East. We have wars going on with Russia and Ukraine. We're going to end up in a third world war, and it'll be a war like no other because of nuclear weapons, the power of weaponry. I rebuilt our entire military. She gave a lot of it away to the Taliban. She gave it to Afghanistan. What these people have done to our country, and maybe toughest of all, is allowing millions of people to come into our country. Many of them are criminals, and they're destroying our country. The worst president, the worst vice president in the history of our country.
President Trump, thank you. And that is our ABC News presidential debate from here in Philadelphia at the National Constitution Center. I'm Lindsay Davis.
And I'm David Muir. Thank you for watching here in the U.S. and all over the world, and from all of us here at ABC News. Good night.
Oh, what a disastrous closing statement that was by Mrs. Emhoff. That was overall, I think she performed probably a little bit better than I expected. I know there was supposed to be no coaching during the commercial breaks, but very clearly somebody got in her ear and said, "Sweetheart, you need to stop the smirking." Because after the first commercial break, she went from smirking 100% of the time to really trying hard to stifle the smirk and look less imperious and condescending. It didn't work all that well, and the closing statement, it's just like I predicted beforehand. It was just an entire smorgasbord of pie in the sky, aspirational platitudes with absolutely no policy specifics. I did jot down a couple of notes that I just want to mention previously. She said that she was in support of the Afghan withdrawal and she thought it was a good plan. And I think she perhaps doesn't fully appreciate just how much of a humiliation that was for a hell of a lot of Americans, even most Americans, I would submit, because that day was the first day that I personally, in my living memory, have ever seen the U.S. military unable to secure one goddamn runway for our own aircraft to take off from. If you weren't embarrassed by that, frankly, there is something freaking wrong with you. You can't secure one runway. You're leaving behind, as Trump said correctly, $85 billion of perfectly usable military equipment and materiel that the Taliban are now happily selling to every single terrorist group in the Middle East and Central Asia. That those weapons and that material are going to be used against us for the next 20, 25, 30, 40 years because of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And I thought it was really bizarre how she talked about Camp David like it's some holy citadel of democracy. How many diplomatic things have ever happened at Camp David? Like the Camp David Accords and the Oslo Accords, and that's like 2 things ever. I didn't know that we were supposed to be treating Camp David as some sort of citadel of diplomacy, but I guess I learned something today. And it's been over 2 hours, so I'm going to get the hell out of here and get some dinner. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I will see you next time. Hope you enjoyed the live stream. Sorry for the little hiccup there in the middle. Have a great day and a pleasant tomorrow. See you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.